On a quiet June morning in 2020, FBI agents and local police dug in the backyard of a rural Idaho property. What they uncovered turned the homestead into a horrific crime scene. The buried remains of two children, 7-year-old J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. Authorities had been searching for these siblings for months, amid fears that their mother, Lori Vallow, and her new husband, Chad Daybell, were hiding a terrible secret. Vallow and Daybell weren't just an ordinary couple. They were deranged doomsday cultists with 7 marriages between them. Over the coming years, investigators from Idaho, Arizona, and beyond would unravel a tangled web of suspicious deaths and cover-ups. This shocking discovery was the tragic culmination of a mystery that began with 2 missing children and spiraled into one of the most bizarre crime stories in recent memory. Lori Vallow was once seen as a loving mother and a devout member of her church. She had 2 children, Tylee and JJ, and for years lived a seemingly ordinary life. Chad Daybell was a fringe religious author and father of 5 who claimed to have special spiritual visions of the apocalypse. He self-published doomsday-themed novels and preached that the end of the world was imminent, even predicting it would happen in July 2020. Both Lori and Chad were affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as Mormons, but their beliefs had strayed far from Mormon orthodoxy by the time they met. In October 2018, Lori and Chad met in person at a religious conference in Utah, and that encounter marked the beginning of their dangerous obsession. In fact, an audio recording later surfaced of Lori speaking at a religious meeting in October 2018, where she joked that she had been tempted to snuff out her 3rd husband, Joseph Ryan. Whether this was simple dark humor or something much worse, it turned into an eerie foreshadowing of what was to come. After meeting Chad, Lori's outlook changed dramatically. She became enthralled by Chad's bizarre teachings and claims of special powers. Chad captivated her with stories of his near-death visions and supposed past lives, and Lori began to believe she was a divine warrior chosen to help usher in Christ's second coming. In early 2019, Lori's then-husband, Charles Vallow, grew alarmed. He told police that Lori had threatened to bump him off, and that she believed she was a god preparing for Christ's second coming, and that anyone in her way would be eliminated. Charles filed for divorce and warned authorities about Lori's behavior. Then, on July 11, 2019, Charles Vallow was shot dead by Lori's brother, Alex Cox, at Lori's Arizona home. Alex claimed he fired in self-defense after Charles allegedly hit him with a baseball bat. Police initially believed the story, since Lori and Tylee supported Alex's account. Lori herself was strangely calm when officers arrived. However, red flags emerged. Alex waited 43 minutes to call 911 and didn't attempt CPR on his dying brother-in-law. And just a week after Charles's death, Lori texted Chad in frustration upon learning that Charles had removed her as the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy. This suggested a possible financial motive layered on top of Lori's extreme new beliefs. By September 2019, Lori had quietly relocated with Tylee and JJ to Rexburg, Idaho, which, unsurprisingly, was the area where Chad Daybell lived. Her brother Alex moved too, renting an apartment nearby. It seemed Lori was gathering her close circle in what they viewed as a prophesied refuge. Lori and Chad even referred to their little sect as the Church of the Firstborn, believing they had a divine mission to lead the 144,000 chosen before the end times. They classified people as light or dark spirits, and said some individuals became zombies. This meant a person whose mortal soul had been pushed out and whose body was taken over by an evil spirit. In their doctrine, The only way to save someone's soul from a zombie was to eliminate that person to release them from quote-unquote demonic captivity. Disturbingly, Lori began insisting that her two children were among those who had become possessed by dark spirits, according to later testimony from her friend Melanie Gibb. Chillingly, text messages between Lori and Chad in 2019 showed them referring to Tylee and JJ as demons and talking about being tired of dealing with these supposed obstacles. At the time they vanished, Tylee was 16 and JJ was 7. Tylee was Lori's daughter from a previous marriage. JJ was her adopted son and the biological grandson of Lori's former sister-in-law, Kay Woodcock. Both of these children had of course been an integral part of the family's life, and their sudden absence in September 2019 raised immediate red flags among relatives. 16-year-old Tylee Ryan was last seen on September 8, 2019, during a day trip to Yellowstone National Park with Lori, Alex, and JJ. After that outing, Tylee was never seen again. About 2 weeks later, 7-year-old JJ Vallow was seen alive for the final time on the night of September 22, 2019. Family friend Melanie Gibb was visiting Lori that weekend, and she later told police that she saw Alex Cox carry a sleeping JJ into Lori's apartment on the night of September 22nd. By the next morning, JJ was gone, and Lori gave Melanie a bizarre explanation. She claimed JJ had become a zombie, and that Alex had to take him away. That same day, Lori called JJ's school to withdraw him, falsely claiming she would now homeschool her son. In reality, JJ was already gone like his sister. Investigators would later use cell phone records to piece together what likely happened to the children. Data from Alex Cox's phone placed him at Lori's apartment in the pre-dawn hours of September 9, 2019, just after Tylee was last seen. Then he was placed in Chad Daybell's backyard for roughly 2 hours that morning. Later that day, Chad sent his wife Tammy a strange text message about having smoked a raccoon and burying it in their pet cemetery. Police found this story suspicious, suspecting it was a cover to explain a fresh grave on the property. Similarly, on the morning of September 23rd, the day after JJ vanished, Alex's phone pinged in Chad's yard again. Those phone pings corresponded closely to the spots where Tylee and JJ's remains would eventually be found buried 9 months later. While the children were being quietly eliminated due to the delusional cultist mental framework, other violent incidents pointed to Lori and Chad's widening circle of targets. On October 2nd, 2019, Lori's niece's ex-husband, Brandon Boudreau, was shot at in a drive-by outside his Arizona home, but thankfully survived. The Jeep used in the attempt belonged to Charles Vallow, implicating Alex Cox as the likely triggerman. Then, on October 9th, 2019, Tammy Daybell, Chad's then-wife, called 911 after a masked man attempted to blast her with what she thought was a paintball gun. She was frightened, but ultimately she wasn't harmed. While there's no proof of this, it's been speculated that this was no paintball pea shooter, but rather a genuine piece of iron potentially wielded by Alex Cox. 10 days later, on October 19th, Tammy died suddenly in her sleep at age 49. Her death was initially recorded as being from natural causes, and no autopsy was performed. In fact, as investigators later found, Tammy had been asphyxiated. The doomsday cultists had struck again, removing another obstacle in their way. With Tammy gone, Chad and Lori had few obstacles left. On November 5th, 2019, less than 3 weeks after Tammy's funeral, Chad and Lori quietly wed in Hawaii. They posed for wedding photos on a Kauai beach with flower leis and broad smiles, while Lori's children were nowhere to be seen. Chad told neighbors that Lori had no minor kids, and Lori herself pretended that her daughter Tylee had died years earlier to explain Tylee's absence. By late November 2019, JJ's grandparents, Larry and Kay Woodcock, were frantic with worry, having been unable to contact the children for months. They alerted authorities in Idaho, and on November 26, 2019, the Rexburg cops knocked on Lori's door to conduct a welfare check on JJ at the grandparents' request. Lori casually lied to the officers, claiming JJ was in Arizona with family friend Melanie Gibb. When police reached out, Gibb advised that JJ wasn't with her at all, but provided no further information. The very next day, November 27th, officers arrived with a search warrant, only to discover that Chad and Lori had fled Idaho during the night. In the following days, investigators learned that on December 1st, 2019, Chad and Lori caught a flight to Hawaii. While police in Idaho and Arizona were frantically searching for the missing kids, the newlywed couple spent that December in Kauai, walking on the beach and refusing to cooperate. On December 11th, 2019, Tammy Daybell's body was exhumed for autopsy in Utah, as detectives now strongly suspected her death was intentional. The very next day, December 12th, Lori's brother, Alex Cox, suddenly collapsed and died of a pulmonary embolism in Arizona. The circumstances of his death still aren't officially understood, as he was found with substances in his system. His unexpected death meant one less conspirator available to answer for the crimes. On December 20th, 2019, police in Rexburg officially announced to the public that Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow were missing under suspicious circumstances. They formally named Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell as persons of interest. The case made national headlines. As bizarre details of Lori's beliefs emerged, the media soon nicknamed her the Cult Mom. Through an attorney, Chad and Lori issued a statement around Christmas denying any wrongdoing and insisting they were loving, devoted parents. Law enforcement, meanwhile, pointed out that the couple's lack of cooperation was astonishing, emphasizing that Lori clearly knew what happened to her kids and was refusing to help. As 2020 began, the FBI joined the investigation, and multiple agencies coordinated to find the children. On January 3rd, investigators executed a search warrant at Chad Daybell's home, seizing computers, cell phones, and journals for any clues. In early January 2020, even Chad's own brother publicly pleaded for him to cooperate with the investigation, saying Chad's family was deeply worried by his extreme claims. The pressure on Lori to produce her children intensified. On January 25, 2020, authorities in Kauai served Lori with a court order from Idaho, demanding she produce Tylee and JJ within 5 days. Unsurprisingly, she didn't comply, and when Lori failed to meet the court deadline, Idaho authorities obtained a warrant for her arrest. On February 20, 2020, Lori Vallow was taken into custody by police in Kauai. She was charged with 2 felony counts of desertion and non-support of dependent children, as well as resisting and contempt of court for ignoring the order to produce the kids. Chad continued to remain a free man for the time being, but I'm gonna let you in on a secret here. This deranged prophet of doom was about to go down hard. Through spring 2020, investigators continued to build their case. Lori's friend Melanie Gibb provided critical information, admitting that Lori and Chad had asked her to tell them JJ was with her in November 2019. Gibb also confirmed the couple's talk of zombies and evil spirits, which helped authorities understand the suspect's twisted mindset. All the evidence pointed police back to Chad's property for a closer look. Further evidence of Lori's deceit came to light in early 2020 when investigators discovered that she had abandoned a storage unit in Rexburg containing her children's belongings. On June 9, 2020, officers returned to Chad Daybell's home with a new search warrant. Chad watched from his driveway as investigators methodically combed through the yard with shovels and probes. In a patch of dirt beneath a tree, they found what looked like a buried bundle wrapped in plastic. Tragically, it turned out to be the remains of 7-year-old J.J. Vallow, still in his red pajamas and bound with duct tape. A short distance away, in the Daybell Pet Cemetery, another site revealed the remains of 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. The heartbreaking discovery confirmed that the children had been slain and clandestinely buried on Chad's land. As soon as investigators uncovered the first human remains, Chad jumped into his car and tried to flee, but officers quickly pulled him over and arrested him a short distance from his home. He was charged with destruction and concealment of evidence for the gruesome burial of the children. In the meantime, police began to work on building evidence for further charges. In May 2021, a grand jury in Idaho indicted Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell on charges related to the deaths of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy Daybell. Prosecutors alleged that the couple, together with Alex Cox, had orchestrated these slayings as part of their apocalyptic religious beliefs, while also seeking to financially profit from the deaths. They noted, for example, that Lori continued to collect Social Security benefits on behalf of the children, even after the children were dead. Chad had quickly obtained life insurance money after Tammy's death. Despite the overwhelming nature of the evidence against them, both Lori and Chad pleaded not guilty to the charges. Around the same time, Arizona authorities brought their own indictments. A grand jury in Arizona charged Lori with conspiring in the slaying of her ex-husband Charles Vallow, with Alex Cox as her co-conspirator. She was also charged in Arizona with conspiring to eliminate Brandon Boudreaux. The full scope of the saga was now laid bare. A string of alleged and attempted slayings spanning 2 states, all tracing back to Lori and Chad's so-called doomsday mission. In mid-2021, the Idaho case paused when Lori was declared incompetent to stand trial and was committed to a psychiatric facility for treatment. After about 10 months of observation and treatment, she declared competent to stand trial by April 2022, and proceedings resumed. Prosecutors initially intended to seek the death penalty against both defendants, given the heinous nature of the crimes. The court also decided to move the coming trial out of the small local community to Boise to ensure an impartial jury due to overwhelming publicity. As trial dates approached, a judge ruled in March 2023 to sever Lori's case from Chad's, scheduling Lori's trial first for April 2023. The judge also removed the death penalty as an option in Lori's trial, mainly because of concerns over timely disclosure of evidence. Chad's trial, still set for 2024, retained the possibility of a trip to the chair. Lori Vallow's trial began in April 2023 in Boise. Prosecutors outlined how she and Chad had transformed their fringe theology into a motive for the slayings, while also scheming to benefit from the deaths. Witnesses described Lori's claims that Tylee and JJ were zombies in the weeks before they disappeared. Lori's defense claimed that she was a loving mother, led astray by Chad's influence, but they had little evidence to counter the overwhelming proof of her involvement. After a 6-week trial, the jury needed only a short deliberation to find Lori Vallow Daybell guilty on May 12, 2023. She was found guilty of the slayings of the kids, as well as conspiracy in the Tammy Daybell case. She was convicted on all counts: the slayings of Tylee and JJ, conspiracy in Tammy Daybell's case, and grand theft for continuing to collect the children's benefits. In July 2023, Lori was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole, with the multiple life terms to be served one after the other. She was later extradited to Arizona to stand trial for the slaying of Charles Vallow and the attempt on Brandon Boudreaux, being found guilty on both accounts. Chad Daybell's trial commenced in April 2024 in Boise. Much of the same damning evidence was presented, with added focus on Tammy Daybell's death and Chad's role as the mastermind of the conspiracy. On June 1st, 2024, the jury unanimously recommended calling down a very localized apocalypse on Chad Daybell in particular, given the heinous, premeditated nature of the crimes. The judge imposed a trip to the chair, making Chad one of the few inmates on Idaho's death row. He was transferred to state prison to await execution, although the appeals process will delay any final resolution for decades. The saga of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell is a chilling cautionary tale of how apocalyptic obsession, fringe religious beliefs, and unchecked greed can erupt into real-world violence. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy, just giving a huge thank you to everyone who views, subscribes, and supports my channel. Seriously, I couldn't do this without you. You're all the best, and I'm so grateful to have you here. Also remember to check out my podcast, Lazy Chill True Crime, and my merch store by clicking the links below. Anyway, with all that said, no more interruptions. Let's get back to business. Gannon Stauch was an 11-year-old boy living with his father Albert and stepmother Letitia in a suburb of Colorado Springs. His parents were divorced, and while his mother Landon lived in South Carolina, Gannon and his younger sister Lena stayed with their dad and Letitia. Those who knew Gannon described him as a kind, shy fifth grader who loved video games and riding his bicycle around the neighborhood. In January 2020, the family's life seemed typical until the day Gannon went missing. On Monday, January 27, 2020, Gannon stayed home from school under Letitia's care, reportedly because he wasn't feeling well. That evening, shortly before 7, Letitia called 911 to report that Gannon hadn't returned home. She claimed the boy had left on foot around 3:15 to go play at a friend's house in the neighborhood and never came back. The El Paso County Sheriff's Office responded and initially treated the case as a runaway situation, a common assumption often made when a slightly older child is missing. Deputies did a brief search of the area that night, but found no trace of Gannon. In the following days, as Gannon remained missing, law enforcement escalated their response. By January 30th, authorities reclassified his case as a missing and endangered child, indicating concern that this was no runaway case as initially speculated. They brought in additional resources, including the FBI. A massive search was launched with law enforcement and volunteers combing the area by land and air. Winter weather added to the challenge, as snow and frigid temperatures made the search even more difficult. As expected, the community rallied around the family. Neighbors volunteered to help search. Gannon's father, Al, rushed back from his National Guard duty, and his mother, Landon, flew in from South Carolina to join the search. Both parents made tearful public pleas for any information that could lead to their son, begging the public to help bring Gannon home safely. Despite the outpouring of support and extensive search efforts, no significant leads turned up in that first week. Gannon's disappearance quickly grabbed national attention, putting intense pressure on law enforcement to find answers. By mid-February, over 500 tips had poured into the sheriff's office, yet still nothing concrete was found. While the public searched desperately, investigators began picking up on inconsistencies in Letitia's account. The first major red flag came from a neighbor's surveillance camera. Also, just as a quick aside, I'm not sure how the surveillance camera wasn't immediately noticed by investigators, given that it had coverage of the material areas at the relevant times. One neighbor reviewed his security camera footage from that Monday and was startled by what he found. The video showed Letitia and Gannon leaving the home together in Al's red Nissan Frontier around 10:15 on the morning of January 27th. Then the footage showed the truck returning about 4 hours later, and notably, Letitia was alone, or at least Gannon was not visible with her. This directly contradicted Letitia's story that Gannon had been at home all day and left on foot in the afternoon. It was now apparent that the last person to see Gannon alive was not a neighbor or friend, but Letitia herself during that truck ride. As the investigation continued, Letitia's behavior did little to allay suspicions. She spoke to local media in the days after Gannon vanished, at one point giving an interview to defend herself. In that interview, Letitia insisted she would never hurt her stepson and complained about being treated as a suspect by the public. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, her story was evolving in bizarre ways. On January 29th, just 2 days after the disappearance, Letitia told detectives an elaborate new tale. She claimed that on the day Gannon went missing, a man had conducted an indecent assault against her in the home and then abducted Gannon. She even provided a name for this supposed assailant, Eduardo, saying he was a tradesman who had come to do some work on some wall-to-wall carpeting. This shocking allegation was completely at odds with what she had initially reported. Investigators found no evidence of any intruder or assault, and believed Letitia's story was fabricated. In fact, over the next couple of weeks, Letitia offered multiple conflicting versions of events to different people. These shifting stories only heightened law enforcement's suspicions that Letitia knew far more about Gannon's disappearance than she was admitting. At one point, Gannon's father, Al, even asked his wife directly, in a recorded call arranged by investigators, if she had hurt Gannon. Letitia didn't confess. Instead, she spun another excuse, which only made Al and the police more certain of her involvement. By early February 2020, investigators were quietly treating Gannon's case as a likely slaying, even though officially he was still listed as missing. They began to amass a collection of forensic and digital evidence pointing to foul play. A pivotal discovery was made when they searched Gannon's bedroom with specialized tools. They discovered Gannon's blood on the walls, and even soaked through the carpet to the concrete floor, despite an apparent attempt to clean it up. Investigators also discovered that on the night of January 27th, Letitia sent her teenage daughter to buy carpet deodorizer, trash bags, and baking soda. These are cleaning items consistent with trying to cover up a crime. This grim finding made it clear a serious violent event had occurred in his bedroom. Additionally, examination of the family's vehicles provided more clues. Letitia's Volkswagen tested positive for Gannon's blood. Alongside the physical evidence, detectives dug into cell phone records, text messages, and surveillance footage from around town to piece together Letitia's movements. They learned that on January 27th, Letitia had deliberately left her own cell phone at home, making it difficult to track her, and used Gannon's phone while they were out. Around 11 a.m. that day, she was captured on a security camera at a Petco store buying pet supplies. Notably, Gannon wasn't with her on that footage. She briefly returned home, then went back out to the same store a little after 1 p.m. for another purchase. These errand runs seemed oddly timed to investigators. They left a gap of time during which investigators suspect Letitia may have harmed Gannon and disposed of evidence. In fact, cell tower data and later investigations suggested that around noon, she drove to a rural area north of Colorado Springs. This is the very area that would later become a location of a key finding related to the case. On top of that, investigators learned that the very next day, January 28th, Letitia made another suspicious move. That morning, she rented a car and left her SUV at a Colorado Springs airport parking lot. Later that night, after her husband returned home from his trip, she retrieved the Volkswagen from the airport. Investigators also found extremely incriminating activity on Letitia's devices. In the days after Gannon vanished, she searched for jobs and apartments in other states, as if planning to leave town. Even more telling, she began to research how to trick polygraph tests. Such actions strongly suggested she knew she was guilty and was trying to cover her tracks. A break in the case came when investigators tracked one of Letitia's suspected routes. Around February 15th, searchers in Douglas County, about an hour north of Colorado Springs, found a piece of particle board off the side of a road that had blood on it. Testing confirmed the blood matched Gannon's DNA. This discovery indicated that Letitia had disposed of some evidence, possibly Gannon's body or items related to the crime, in that area. With this critical evidence and everything else they had compiled, authorities decided they could wait no longer. Letitia, for her part, had since fled to Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. On March 2nd, 2020, the El Paso County Sheriff's Office announced the arrest of Letitia Stauch in Myrtle Beach. Even though Gannon's body had not yet been found at that time, the evidence of foul play was strong enough for prosecutors to charge her with Gannon's slaying. She was soon extradited back to Colorado to face a litany of charges related to Gannon's death. By this stage of the investigation, authorities had executed well over 100 search warrants. Not long after her arrest, while being transported back to Colorado, Letitia attempted to escape custody by attacking a deputy during a transport stop. She was quickly subdued, but the incident served to show her extreme desperation as the walls closed in on her. 2 weeks later, the case reached a heartbreaking conclusion. On March 17, 2020, workers doing maintenance under a bridge over Escambia Bay in Pace, Florida, discovered a suitcase in the water. Inside the suitcase was the most disturbing discovery imaginable: Gannon's body. This location was more than 1,000 miles from Colorado. The autopsy report sadly confirmed that Gannon had died a brutal death at the hands of this woman who was supposed to care for him. Investigators concluded that after slaying Gannon, Letitia initially hid his body in Colorado, but later retrieved the remains and drove cross-country for a further dumping effort. She likely detoured through the Florida Panhandle while traveling east, casting the suitcase off a bridge in hopes it would never be found. With Gannon's remains recovered, prosecutors gained the final piece of evidence tying the crime to Letitia. They promptly filed additional charges against her, reflecting the premeditated and violent nature of the brutal attack. 3 years later, in spring 2023, Letitia finally went on trial. She pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of her planning and cover-up. After weeks of testimony, the jury rejected her insanity claim and found her guilty. In the end, a judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fate that's ultimately way too good for this sick monster.